The Washington Commanders finished the 2023 season with a 4-13 record and missed the playoffs for the third consecutive year. 2023 was the fourth and final year under head coach Ron Rivera, and during the Ron Rivera era, the most amount of games the team won in one season was 8, and this franchise has not won a playoff game since 2005. It's been a long few decades for the Washington Commanders, previously the football team and previously the Redskins, but the future for this franchise starts this offseason. They have the number 2 overall draft pick and will more than likely take their quarterback in the future, but what's important to remember is this team doesn't just have the number 2 overall pick. They also have 5 draft picks in the top 100 and 6 in the top 102, and the future for this franchise looks bright for the first time in a very long time. It is more than just having the number 2 overall pick, and we will dive into everything for the Commanders this offseason and project what their team will look like in 2024. This team will look considerably different next year, and there is a lot to dive into in today's video. Now let's begin. The first step to competing in today's NFL is to have a quarterback. As cliche or as simple as it sounds, it's true. The Chiefs built a dynasty off of having a great quarterback, a Hall of Fame head coach and tight end, but they obviously do not have the success they've had without Patrick Mahomes. The Rams won a Super Bowl back in 2021 due in large part to trading for Matt Stafford, and you get the point. Despite how bad the 2023 season was for Washington, the fortunate part of their 4-win season was finishing in the top 2 of the 2024 draft and having the opportunity to take the presumable quarterback of the future. Drafting who we can assume at this point is either Drake May or Jaden Daniels will be the first steps to getting Washington back on track. Personally, I think it will be Drake May. The big thing to remember with Washington as we go throughout this video is how far away this team is from seriously competing. This isn't your standard 4-win team that may have a pass rusher or 2, or a franchise tackle, or really anything. This team lost by an average score of 30-19 in 2023, and after winning what would be their final game in Week 9 over the Patriots, the fewest amount of points they gave up in the remaining 7 games was 27, which was to the 49ers. This team was outscored by the division rival Dallas Cowboys by a cumulative score of 83-20 when these teams played. Having said all of this, one of my biggest frustrations with the Commanders during the 2023 season was the abrupt move to trade not only Montez Sweat, who was a former first-round pick, but Chase Young too, who of course was selected number 2 overall back in 2020. I like the trades for the Bears and 49ers where these trades were made because the benefits they were receiving from each player was obvious. Each franchise received a player that would go on to generate 60 or more pressures in 2023, and now Washington is in a difficult pass rushing situation because now they have to replace both players. If there is any good news out of this, or to have an optimistic outlook through this, it's that the Commanders have a ton of cap space this offseason, and there are a lot of pass rushing free agents available. Whether it would be throwing big money at a player like Jonathan Grenard of the Texans, or even Danielle Hunter of the Vikings, the money is there for them. Chase Young, in theory, is a free agent, but I doubt the Commanders would bring him back after trading him just a few months ago. The reason this is brought up, of course, is the Commanders will almost certainly address the defensive line or pass rush in free agency or the NFL draft, and it wouldn't surprise me if, in fact, they address this part of their team in both free agency and the draft. Not only will the Commanders address the pass rush this offseason, but one part of their roster they will most certainly address with a top 2 pick coming into play quarterback is, of course, the offensive line. We mentioned earlier the Commanders have 6 picks in the top 102 overall selections, but more specifically they have 3 picks in the top 40. One of the better routes that I think the Commanders will certainly look into is trading back into the first round in order to secure an offensive lineman of the future too. This would presumably be into the top 15 or 20, and the Commanders certainly have the ammo. This would not be trading from pick 36 to pick 29, but rather into the top 20, because the hit rates between picks 25 and 32 in the first round are not drastically different from picks 36 through 40 in the second round, which is where the Commanders' 2 second-round picks are. Yes, of course, there is some level of drop-off, and this is based on the average hit of a first-round pick, but the difference in picks 1 through 15 and 25 through 32 is substantial on average, which makes sense because those guys selected in the earlier part of the first round are usually graded as true first-round picks, where oftentimes first-round picks in the back half of the first round are not necessarily graded as first-round talents despite being first-round picks. Where we go with this and the outlook of the Commanders in 2024 and beyond is it's not unreasonable to think they could invest heavy money in the pass rush this offseason and trade back up to get their offensive tackle in the future and effectively try and take care of these three major positions in one offseason. This is important for Washington because their goal entering 2024 isn't to go from worst to first and to compete for a Super Bowl. Would it be nice? Sure, but I don't think it's realistic, and I don't think even the most optimistic Commanders fans would think that. This team, for lack of better wording, was bad throughout the year, but specifically bad at the end of the 2023 season. The goal this offseason is to simply improve the roster because what's important to remember with Washington is they are not a player or two away from going to the Super Bowl. I think you can make a case that a lot of teams are in fact a player or two away, but even for all the jokes people like to get in about the Cowboys losing in the playoffs, Dallas embarrassed them when they played last year. The Eagles' 2023 season was very abnormal as there were a lot of things that happened, but I do think Philly can win the division in 2024 and get back to the NFC Championship game for the second time in 3 years. Washington, weirdly enough, will get beat by 20 by the Bears at home, which happened last year, and play Philly down to the wire for whatever reason, but even as tight as Washington plays Philly, which they did both times they played in 2023, so credit to the Commanders, I don't think they would go into Philly with the season on the line and beat them, period. There is a big talent discrepancy between the two teams. That's a big reason why this offseason is so critical for the Commanders. When you select in the top 2 or 3 picks in a draft, your goal is to not be picking here again under the current regime because most of the time, if you have back-to-back top 3 picks, the coaching staff and front office, again most of the time, are on their way out the door too. Washington isn't going to go from 4 wins to 12 wins next year, and we have brought this up with other teams before, like the Cardinals when we broke down their situation, but the goal for the 2024 Commanders is to not be the 2023 Texans. It would be nice, of course, but the goal is to have a quarterback you think you can legitimately build around for the next several years, and do everything in your power to ensure he does not fail as a young player. Like we mentioned, the goal of the 2024 Commanders not being what the Texans were last year, we also mentioned the goal is to not be the 2023 Panthers with a young quarterback either. The good news for Washington is they will have better weapons to throw to than what Bryce Young had in Carolina last year, and that starts with Terry McLaurin. We mentioned earlier how the Commanders will probably address pass rush in free agency, and I think they will, but one player in particular I would love for Washington to go after this offseason is Bucs wide receiver Mike Evans. Mr. 1000 has had over 1,000 yards in every season of his career since being a first-round pick back in 2014, and given the lack of talent on Washington's roster, they don't have many players to pay, so they more than have the money to pay Mike this offseason. If you were wondering, Washington has the most cap space available, and I know the Commanders took a lot of heat during the Dan Snyder era, rightfully so by the way, but with a new ownership, new GM, and new head coach, money should not be the reason Mike Evans does not come to DC this offseason. Mike is a 6'5", 240-pound receiver who can win the contested catches, as well as get open due to his route running ability. He has over 11,000 career yards and has 94 career touchdowns and has nearly 800 receptions in his career. This will be the spiciest take I have for the Commanders this offseason in terms of what I think GM Adam Peters should do this offseason, and it's get Mike Evans no matter what. What I mean by this is if you have to pay him an average of 25 or 26 or 27 million per year, which at the time of this video release would make him the 4th highest paid receiver in terms of average annual value, behind Tyreek, Devontae, and Cooper Kupp, you do it. For what it's worth, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Ayuk, and Jamar Chase are going to get paid soon, and those numbers will rise in terms of average annual value, but the point is, if you are Adam Peters, you do not lose on Mike Evans due to money. If you lose out hypothetically because Mike would rather remain a Buck for the remainder of his career where he takes less money to be a Buck, or because he goes to Detroit to try and win another ring, who also has a lot of money to work with in free agency, and he takes a discount, then you can't control that. Also, I don't think Mike would go to Detroit as much as I'm just using an example. But the point is, if you have to offer Mike Evans a 3-year deal worth $81 million, which would be an average of 27 per year, and have the first 2 years be guaranteed, meaning 54 of the 81 being guaranteed, you do it, no questions asked. Mike would be a great contrast to the Terry McLaurins, Jahan Dotsons, and Curtis Samuels type receivers of the world, or previously Curtis since he is also a free agent, but on 3rd and 9 when it comes hell or high water and Drake May needs somebody to throw the ball to, who do you think he's going to look to more often than not? When projecting free agent fits and possible destinations, there is no free agent fit I love more than the idea of Mike Evans going to the Washington Commanders. The reason specifically for the contract layout like this is if Mike Evans were to be a free agent bust, which I don't think he would be, but if he were to be a free agent bust, it wouldn't really matter in the grand scheme of things because this goes back to a point made earlier. The Commanders do not have a lot of talent on the roster and they wouldn't be able to pay anybody because of the Mike Evans contract. Not only that, but I would be doing everything in my power to ensure my rookie quarterback, selected number 2 overall, has the best possible chance to succeed at the NFL level. The best way of doing that, of course, would be to bring in a big-bodied receiver in free agency, draft a ton in the trenches, and go from there. If the Commanders cannot get Evans, then I think they should look heavily into either Keon Coleman from Florida State or A.D. Mitchell from Texas. Both guys are 6'4" receivers, and I am a big advocate for building your receiver room with different types of receivers, and Washington needs an above-the-rim 6'3" plus guy. I would also like them to address the tight end position at some point this offseason, and I would love for them to be able to bring in a guy like Ja'Tavion Sanders from Texas, who has risen up draft boards over the past month or so, but adding a tight end with the amount of needs the Commanders have in the 2nd round, to me at least, simply isn't practical. I know a lot of people are probably wondering if we're going to talk about the Commanders linebackers or corners in this video, and we will, but the most important thing for Washington next year is to ensure Drake May does not get absolutely killed before he even has a chance. Good offensive linemen rarely hit free agency, so that was why we brought up the possibility of this team going up to get one of their tackles in the future, while bringing in a guy like Mike Evans in free agency. I have said multiple times on the channel that I hated the Emmanuel Forbes pick when it was made because I didn't see the value in selecting an inferior prospect at the same position when Christian Gonzalez was on the board. To be completely honest, I would be surprised if Forbes becomes a good starting corner because we're now in a different regime that has no ties to Emmanuel and certainly are not required to play him. I think it would definitely be in the team's best interest to retain Kendall Fuller and to address the corner position at some point early in the 2024 draft. Obviously, helping your quarterback out is the most important thing, but if the Commanders can snag a corner at pick 67 or 100, or both for that matter, I would feel a lot better about them moving forward. Just being honest, I wasn't the biggest fan of the Dan Quinn hire, although I do wish him the best as the coach of the Commanders. I like one decision that's already been made, however, and that is to have Dan take care of everything on defense and have Cliff Kingsbury focus on the offense. Cliff certainly had his ups and downs during his time with the Cardinals, but I like this almost dual approach Washington has here with Quinn as the head coach and Cliff effectively having full control of the offense. The ideal offseason for the Commanders would be to draft Drake May and draft an offensive tackle as well, and feel out how the board is going and hopefully have one slide, that way they don't have to give up an enormous amount of draft capital to go get a tackle. If they can't bring in Mike Evans in free agency, then I like A.D. Mitchell or Keon Coleman to help give May another weapon and go from there. Pass rush will be significantly easier to address in free agency than the draft this year for Washington, and for them the goal is simple. Simply sign players that will improve your pass rush, which for the Commanders at this point in time will not be difficult. That, of course, is at edge and not the interior defensive line. Washington finished the 2023 season 25th in points per game and 29th in turnovers, and their goals in 2024 should be to finish in the top 20 in points and top 20 in turnovers, minimum, by the way. I think they can win 5 to 8 games in 2024, but the foundation of the Commanders will be built in the next few months. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as only about 32% of people watching are subscribed, and it helps the channel tremendously. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.